questions yet. Let's move on. Colleen and Jen, are you guys ready to roll with, what is it, evaluation of a learning experience for nursing clinicians working with students experiencing mental health concerns? So I'll just pass it on over to Colleen and Jen and we'll get them started. Thank you, Colleen.
Just make sure my screen's set up properly. Hope you can see this. No, you can't. So you can see the note slides, can't you?
Yes.
Yep.
Now you can't.
Correct.
Okay, are we ready, Jen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'll just move the pictures of everybody somewhere out of my writing field. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for spending the next 15 minutes or so with us. I'm Colleen, Ryan and Jen Mulvogue, you'll hear about very shortly. So together we're sharing with you today the design of an educational intervention that intended to support nursing clinicians to work more effectively with students experiencing mental health concerns during their clinical placements, clinical rotations, work integrated learning components, whatever you like to refer to it in your own discipline. We're going to discuss how a co-designed approach assisted us to work with the target population and offered the participants professional development that was meaningful for them. And we'll share a little bit of their evaluations, although most of it will be about the content. And we'll be introducing, of course, the workshop design. It's yours, Jen.
I often think of being accepted and going to university as being an exciting and progressive period of time in a person's life. However, sometimes this is not the case at all. Studies from CONA now and colleagues identify a high percentage of students with depressive symptoms. Stallman in 2010 identified that psychological problems in university students can seriously affect their academic achievement and hinder their development. And Jay Sarkar and colleagues identified that one of the most anxiety-producing experiences for students is clinical placement, and that at these times students often have increased anxiety and distress. Wynaden and colleagues in a large study of nursing academics from several universities reported working with and supporting nursing students experiencing mental health concerns and said that it was a hidden burden for nursing clinical teachers. You, Colleen.
Yep. So during one of the studies I conducted in my doctoral thesis, which I presented yesterday afternoon in this conference, sorry, I don't know why that's jumping around. After one of our data collection sessions that I'd run, some clinical teachers who were my participants, or the participants, sorry, approached me and said, could you do something around some professional development for us so that we can work more effectively with students in, experiencing mental health concerns. What we were doing in that thesis study was looking at ways they could overcome wicked problems and pressing challenges that were impeding their work. So what was quite shocking was that they told me straight off the top of their head, or shared with me several different cases of students that they'd recently had to work with to support them experiencing depression and anxiety, and one case of suicide or disclosure of suicidal ideation that took place while the student was on placement with them in the hospital. So with these clinical teachers, they are educators. They work with nursing students, supporting and assessing their clinical learning, as we've said. And pastoral care has long been known to be a part of their work, but it was never intended to be so. And therefore, most of them don't have counselling skills. It's not a requirement. It's not something that's ever been addressed. And there was a study in 2015 by McAllister and colleagues who noted that this was an escalating component of their role, and that it was concerning that there was no requirement whatsoever for these educators to be prepared in any way to work with anxious or distressed students. So I was a bit hesitant because I'm not a mental health nurse. So I went and met with their manager, who I've actually engaged with in work before, and she asked, could I find a way to deliver it, because the team knew me and there were a lot of sensitive issues. So that's when I approached Jen. and because we've done some work in the mental health space together before. So when Jen and I first started talking about this professional development opportunity, it occurred to us we didn't really know what the facilitators needed from us. We knew they were stressed. So that we thought we'd employ like a participatory approach to understanding their needs first. Because participatory approaches come out of action research and they allow researchers and participants to work together, usually in several cycles that include action, like learning something or practicing something, and reflection, in order to examine problems, challenge the status quo, and therefore eventually make improvements or at least change to their practice. So in this project, this professional development, whilst we never intended to have multiple cycles, normally you would plan for 3, we did have 2 meetings with this group. And in between the 2 meetings, we liaised via email so that we could come to conclusions around the workshop content to ensure that it would meet their needs. The first meeting was a focus group. And this was attended by 4 of the clinical teachers out of there was a key group of 13 that attended this professional development. And we just asked some really broad questions. Jen was on the phone by then and she'll tell you why. So it was interesting. And what we found afterwards when Jen and I talked was that there was definitely a gap in mental health nursing skills and experience and knowledge. There was a gap in understanding the university supports that were available to them. So that was something that we needed to address. They were obviously stressed from working with this group of students. And also we felt that the students were stressed because of their anxiety and depression. And this was causing tension because they were unable to perform clinically, even though they had some of them appeared to have the knowledge and the skills.
We discussed some of the more prevalent mental health issues students experience, such as anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol use, eating disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. And some of these were identified in the focus group as issues more commonly brought to the attention of the facilitators. So we included these in the workshop for discussion, and others were in the literature. So Sanders and Lee in 2012 found a need for clinical facilitators to act in this pastoral role. Olana and Associates in 2018 and Wynaden in 2014 explained that young students are often working as well as studying, and they may experience separation from their family or have pressure of study. And these things may contribute to anxiety or feelings of depression or other presentations. In addition to this, students often feel a pressure of new and unfamiliar settings, and that it made them quite anxious. Expectations of competence is very high. There are high expectations that the student will be able to care for patients, but that they often have unpredictable levels of support around them. So through this experience, students will require additional emotional assistance. However, as McAllister and colleagues identified in 2015, clinical facilitators do not formally require this skill set. So in the workshop, we discussed protective factors such as support networks, feelings of belonging and connection, family and community connectiveness, self-esteem, cultural identity, problem-solving ability, perceived competence, and those sorts of things, which may keep a person protected from experiencing further mental health difficulties. We discussed what happens at times to a person entering university, and that sometimes those protective factors are shaky or broken down, and that the student may find themselves losing confidence or experiencing anxiety or depression or have other presentations. We used some practical examples. For example, if you're a person who usually feels confident and your own level of competence and you start in a clinical placement, you your level of confidence within yourself may change, and you may find that you start experiencing really high anxiety symptoms, which might be overwhelming. Because at this time I'd relocated to Mackay, the workshop was delivered by Colleen using my voiceover and some of the PowerPoints, and I was able to contribute to the mental health content. We're in the process of updating the videos for 2021, and we hope to have more face-to-face opportunities. We introduced the participants to a young woman living with anxiety through a YouTube clip. Following this, we invited the participants to engage in a role play to practice responding to a person in distress. We included empathic listening tools. Other practical exercises included looking at Seeds and Mahali's flow model, and this helped participants in the workshop to begin to look at why people in the workplace may feel overwhelmed, they might feel anxious or lack interest in what they're doing. And on the other hand, they may feel quite full of control and have lots of confidence in their skill and their challenge level. And this enabled the facilitators time to self-reflect and to discuss about their own position on the flow model, in their current positions, and how this skill level or challenge level influenced how they felt about their positions. Then we asked them to consider the flow model for students on clinical placement and what happens when a student has minimal skill but has great expectation, and what impact does that have on them. And then we invited the participants to explore their own self-care and then encourage them to write up their own self-care plan and to share this with their colleagues, and then to implement it and then to stick to it.
And so some of the other activities that we had in this professional development workshop was we felt it was important to give the facilitators schemas or models that they could use in engaging in conversations and responding to a person in distress. So as we identified, we did introduce them to some of the CQUniversity processes and frameworks. I had permission from CQ Counselling to do that. So the working with distressed and the disclosure of domestic violence. So they got all those frameworks, which was helpful for them. And then we introduced them to the 3R response model from CQ, which is a bit of a modified model. And I also had just finished and received certification as a mental health first aider. So I took some models from that. And one of them is a very simple model called ALGE. Assess for risk, listen to understand, not to respond, which was gave them a chance to practice their empathetic and active listening. Gaining the person's support, give reassurance and information. Encourage appropriate professional help, and encourage self-help and other support strategies. So all of these tied in together, and it was able to take them away from this counselling role that some of them had sort of accidentally fallen into. So at this point, to practice these models and other activities in keeping with the participatory model, we had short role plays, and they all took different roles of either student, facilitator or observer. And then we gave them time to have a reflective conversation in their little groups and with the wider group to identify how they could improve on their skills. So, the manager wanted some robust evaluation because she was giving 3 hours of paid time. So Jen and I designed a little survey, 12 items with using Kirkpatrick's first 3 levels of educational evaluation to measure the learner's reaction to content and delivery of the workshop, their change in attitudes, knowledge and skills, and their willingness to apply the new knowledge. The data analysis is completed, but we didn't want to get too researchy here, and it is going to be written up for a paper. It'll be submitted by December. But you can see there that the kind of, we had, so an interesting thing was the first group of facilitators couldn't actually, their evaluations aren't in this study because we didn't think really to research it until we had commenced with them, and their organisation wouldn't give retrospective ethics. We had CQ ethics, but we didn't have theirs. So that's just a tip. If you're going to run something on site in another organisation, you always have to have all your ethics lined up, not just the CQ one. But what they said at the end of that workshop and what they emailed to us was that they really wanted their workshop or the workshop to be spread out to other people. So in my role as an industry liaison educator, we managed to run the workshop 6 times throughout Southeast Queensland in 2019. And all up, we had 58 clinical facilitators attend and 34 matching surveys. Again, most of the participants requested that the workshop go online, which is something that we are going to work on. So that it can have wider access and be accessible not only to nursing clinical facilitators. The participants in this study, very few of them had any mental health experience, skills or knowledge, and only, I think it was 3 from memory, had mental health qualifications. And that's surprising, the self-care plans and their commitment to the self-care plans within the workshop was something that really surprised me. It was really well received, and a lot of them actually committed with their colleague that they would continue with their plan. So they rated overall the workshop very highly, and that's why the videos are being redone at the moment, so we can do something with an online version. So finally, all our happy little nursing students, CQ nursing students here, some are on placement in these images, some are working to prepare for placement. But, you know, as Jen said, despite university students being predisposed to mental distress as a result of stresses and increased pressure, those nurses that work in the clinical facilitation roles are often the first line of support for these students, but they're not always equipped. They may feel overwhelmed, low in confidence when faced with working with students in distress. And the unfortunate thing, or what I feel is unfortunate, which is why I work in this space, is that these clinical teachers are not always privy to the kinds of PD we get in academia. And so they're considered to be expected to assess and teach and support, but without the professional development. And so, as we've said, they've had, in addition to that, this group experiencing this particular problem had little experience with mental health difficulties or even responding to people in the general population around mental health concerns. What we'd like to share, or what we hope to share from this, is that we hope we've shown that by first spending the time working with the clinical teachers to understand their challenges, and then including them in the content and the design, which took place via email rather than another meeting, we did design a workshop that assisted participants to increase their mental health literacy, to learn new techniques and strategies to work with distressed students, to protect themselves and enhance their own self-care, and to understand the university processes available to them. The process was not only effective for the group who requested the professional development, but proved meaningful for a range of other teams of clinical facilitators, because at their assistance, we spread the workshop more widely. COVID-19 put a bit of a stop on some workshops that had been planned for 2020, and those workshops have actually been rescheduled for February 2021. So we'll see where we go with that. So unless Jan's got anything to add, I think it's over to you, Cherie.
No, I have nothing to add.
Thank you, Colleen and Jen. That was very interesting. Yeah, it was very, very interesting.